welcome to the Spring 2022 Rohm and Haas Fellow in Focus lecture presented by the Arnold and Mabel Beckman Center for the History of Chemistry at the Science History Institute. I'm Charlotte Abney Solomon. I'm Associate Director of the Beckman Center, and it is my honor this evening to welcome you all and to introduce our speaker, our Price Stone postdoctoral fellow, Isabelle Held. We're very glad you've all joined us this evening for our spring lecture. The Rohm and Haas Fellow in Focus lecture series gives us the opportunity each spring and fall to invite some of our outstanding fellows a forum to present their work to a broad audience interested in history, science, and culture. The Science History Institute is home to the largest private fellowship program in the historical study of science, medicine, and technology in the United States, with around 20 scholars in residence each year. We offer short-term, dissertation, and postdoctoral fellowships on an annual cycle for scholars whose research benefits from the use of our collections, and we welcome researchers from all over the world each year to take part in our vibrant scholarly community. For more information on our fellowship program, we invite you to visit us at sciencehistory.org/fellowships. Before we begin this evening, I'll say a bit about the format of the lecture. Dr. Held will speak for about 45 minutes, after which we'll have 10 minutes for audience Q&A. If you have questions, you can send them in during the talk using the chat function here on YouTube. You'll just need to log in to post your question, and we'll be collecting questions from the chat for the Q&A. Our speaker tonight is Isabelle Marina Held, who is an interdisciplinary design historian focusing on the body, materiality, science, and technology. Dr. Held earned her PhD from the Victoria and Albert Museum and Royal College of Art's doctoral program in history of design. She's worked as a lecturer in cultural and historical studies at London College of Fashion, University of the Arts London, as well as University for the Creative Arts, and in the history of design at the Royal College of Art. As the Science History Institute's Price Stone postdoctoral fellow for 2020 through 2022, she's been working on her forthcoming book, solicited by Duke University Press and tentatively titled Atomic Bombshells: How Plastics Shaped Post-War Bodies. Additionally, Isabelle is curating exhibitions and programming events for the Institute that explore science, material culture, and the body. Our introduction this evening featured objects that Dr. Held currently has on display at the Science History Institute Museum's Exhibit Lab, which you are all welcome to come and visit in person tomorrow evening, May the 6th, from 5 to 7 p.m. at our First Fridays at the Museum event, Plastic Fashion. We'll have more information about that event at the end of the program. But now, without further ado, here is Dr. Isabelle Held with Nylon and the Test Tube Girl, Reimagining Plastic Futures.
DuPont unveiled nylon stockings in 1939 at two U.S. World's Fairs in San Francisco and New York. DuPont's Wonder World of Science exhibitions celebrated the chemical company's slogan of better living through chemistry. A year prior, DuPont had announced that nylon was the world's first fully synthetic fiber, and it soon became the most sought-after material on display. The exhibitions featured a white woman who came to be known as Miss Chemistry and the Test Tube Girl. Dressed head to toe in synthetics, she embodied the latest scientific developments, including nylon. In this talk, I'll analyze the image of the test tube girl, exploring the racialized and gendered aspects of this performance and related imagery. I chart how she became a living symbol of a new plastics age, when the fashionable ideal woman was designed using science and plastics, both on the skin's surface and later within it. The test tube girl and other figures like her, largely envisaged by powerful white men such as journalists, chemists, filmmakers, designers, and advertisers, represent how changing material technologies were promoted and domesticated in relation to the gendered and racialized body. In these representations, the future is plastics, but apparently only for an elite breed of malleable white American woman. Unlike foundational scholarship on nylon and its presentations, such as Jeffrey Michael and Susanna Handley's histories, I utilize critical thinking on the body, race, and gender. I offer a new perspective on the test tube girl by contextualizing her presentation within wider cultural discourse around racialized gender ideals within fashion, streamlined design, and eugenics. Race and gender were also encoded into experimental nylon objects such as light beige and peach-colored experimental wear test underwear, developed with the white woman in mind. These images and objects collectively enforced and embodied white womanhood as the unmarked norm and ideal. Drawing on original research using Black publications and the Digital Transgender Archive, I'll also show how some individuals and companies actively worked against these biases and binaries in the ensuing decades. Companies like Basin Street Nylons and Tana and Mara developed, designed, produced, and marketed nylons specifically for a wider range of consumers, including queer, trans, and gender non-conforming people, as well as people of color. In their inclusive approach to design and marketing, these companies questioned unmarked norms of hegemonic American womanhood that centered on whiteness and heteronormativity. These previously unexplored examples offer a vital counter-history to nylon and the test tube girls' normalization of bodies and mass production that mobilized a standard ideal of womanhood as white. Instead, companies including Basin Street Nylons and Tana and Mara envisaged a future of nylon stockings, also known as nylons, designed to cater to a wider range of consumers beyond such restrictive norms. Visitors to DuPont's 1939 displays had already heard of nylon and its potential for hosiery, as this had been publicly announced in October 1938. DuPont's advertising department promoted nylon as being, quote, strong as steel, yet fine as a spider's web. Journalists circulated stories of future nylon stockings being run-proof, adding to the hype of a seemingly supernatural material conjured from coal, air, and water. Audiences came to the world's fairs, longing to finally see and touch the sensationalized nylon. DuPont's advertising department had not fully anticipated nylon's popularity in their exhibit designs, as evidenced by their archival materials such as designs and reports. In the background of this promotional photograph, we can see one of nylon's original sections in the exhibit, a pair of mechanized hands endlessly tugging a pair of nylon stockings back and forth. DuPont's ad department actively responded to visitor feedback that consistently named nylon as the most requested item by making changes throughout the duration of the display. This included adding a live model. Originally hired as DuPont's receptionist for the New York World's Fair, Catherine Mitten was reinvented as Miss Chemistry and added to the nylon demonstration on stage. Here, an actor posing as a chemist would, quote, call attention to the fact that she is dressed by chemistry from head to toe, unquote. In this process, the glamour and seduction of new materials likewise transformed and supposedly improved Mitten, the local white girl next door. In this role, Mitten's modeling brought synthetics to life. Stepping down from the lab and engaging with the audience to answer questions, she served as gendered mediator between lab and visitors. Once nylon stockings were finally sold to the US public, this performance became increasingly spectacular. In her final incarnation, a chemist opened the door of a giant luminescent test tube to reveal Miss Chemistry. The ad department's vision of a white woman created in a test tube, dressed from head to toe in plastics, remained a popular trope for the company and others. Almost a year after Mitten first appeared on stage in the lab in June 1940, the DuPont Style News Service sent a press release titled Test Tube Fashions, with imagery of a woman in a test tube to 568 newspapers. DuPont further transformed Miss Chemistry into an ethereal deity, a genie spirit released from a man's test tube that loomed larger than life. The accompanying text stated, during the summer of 1940 at the New York World's Fair, DuPont introduced to the public a Miss Chemistry of the future, dressed from head to toe in articles made with nylon yarn. Her underthings and foundation garments all were made with a new yarn. Nothing was said about her operation, but she could well have completed the picture with an incision sewn up with nylon surgical suture. The future Miss Chemistry was dressed entirely in nylon, including satin shoes, stockings, and a blue lace dress visible to the audience. No longer just dressed in nylon stockings that the audience can see, her undergarments were also made of nylon. Moreover, DuPont's advertising writers speculated about her hidden incisions stitched with nylon sutures. This contrasts with observations of Miss Chemistry's previous iterations, such as those in a 1939 issue of National Geographic, when a journalist marveled how, quote, only the girl herself was natural flesh and bone wrapped in her own waterproof skin. There she stood, a startling symbol of this new artificial world risen so fast since the World War, end quote. Unlike these earlier observations, Miss Chemistry gradually became a figure whose entire body was shaped by advancements in plastics, science, technology, and medicine. The reference to sutures is opaque, and it's not clear the purpose of her operation. Is it strictly medical or of the cosmetic variety? Perhaps its vagueness indicates the latter. Miss Chemistry's body was increasingly becoming a site of transformation, no longer on the skin's surface, but also within it. The vision of Miss Chemistry as, quote, distilled beauty from the test tube fits into wider contemporary discourse on building, designing, and creating racialized gendered bodies. The test tube girl and the white female body as a malleable material of transformation is echoed by fashions of the future. American Vogue commissioned 9 white male industrial designers for this editorial feature in its February 1939 issue that celebrated the New York World's Fair. The fashions also debuted in a New York World's Fair party, were displayed in windows of popular New York shops, and appeared in a Vogue Pathé movie. 4 of the 9 designers went beyond designing clothing and accessories to comment and construct future white women's bodies for the year 2000. Their creation alluded to eugenics as the designers fantasized over a future female race. Famous influential streamlined industrial designers Donald Desky, Walter Darwin Teague, and Raymond Loewy speculated in the year 2000 women's bodies would be, quote, perfect and beautified, unquote, by supposed scientific advancement, resulting in transparent clothing as the norm. Freed from restrictive clothing and underwear, Desky's white models appear active as if in the throes of a eurythmic dance. He claimed, quote, medical science will have made her body perfect. She'll never know obesity, emaciation, colds in the head, superfluous hair, or a bad complexion, thanks to a controlled diet, controlled basal metabolism. Her height will be increased, her eyelashes lengthened with some X hormone. Desky reasoned that with the perfection of women's bodies, foundation wear would become redundant. Walter Darwin Teague similarly forecast near nudity. He designed a revealing transparent robe. The white model's lucite-heeled feet and other body parts are semi-exposed. Teague noted that in the future, quote, most women will have beautiful bodies and the present trend toward nudity will continue at an accelerated pace, end quote. In Teague's vision, further chemical R&D into transparent plastic materials would coincide with what he termed better bodies, each accentuating and complementing each other. In Teague's hierarchy, plastics research and development and women's improved bodies were given the same importance and value, interchangeably showcasing each other's perfections. Like his white male designer colleagues, engineer Georges Sarkier visualized a white woman. He imagined, quote, the woman of the future will be tall and slim and lovely. She will be bred to it for the delectation of the community and her own happiness, unquote. Sarkier's preference for tall and slim, quote, bred women is underpinned by the same racialized gendered ideals of white womanhood that circulated on the pages of Vogue. As these examples suggest, designers were incorporating eugenics into their ideas of the future. Raymond Loewy was the most direct, stating, "Eugenic selection may bring generations so aesthetically correct that such transparent and revealing clothes will be in order." Here, white women's bodies were presented as speculative products of white male scientific advancement. Historian Christina Cogdell has explored the links between streamlined design and eugenics. She considers how eugenic ideology infiltrated middle-class culture in the 1930s America and became embodied within streamlined designs and aesthetics. Cogdell notes that streamline was the first wide-scale mass-produced industrial design style in the US. She argues that streamlined designers approach products the same way eugenicists approach bodies. In 1934, Loewy, an advocate of streamlined design, created a chart of female dress and figure, mapping changes in popular women's dress and the fashionable female figure. This stands out from his other evolutionary charts showing product design developments such as that of the desk telephone or rail car, in that it includes the human body. Loewy compared the female figure alongside designed artifacts, implying that the female body can be designed in accordance with the fashionable ideal. This chart denotes that efficiency and improvement in design can be streamlined to an ever-reduced svelte body. The female figure is increasingly minimized, and unlike his other product designs, all that remains of the future woman is a slither-thin question mark suspended in midair. Vogue's 1939 World's Fair issue demonstrates that industrial designers applied streamlined design to the female body itself. Her body was reduced in size, flesh minimized, and bodies that were not white and Anglo-Saxon or Northern European in appearance were omitted. As shown, the test tube girl and Vogue's streamlined body of the future was a racialized white American body. Scholars Elizabeth Hyken and Sonda Gilman discuss cosmetic surgery as a tool for Italian Americans, Jewish Americans, and other recent immigrants to alter their appearance and social presentation. Assimilating to American ideals included anglicized names, facial surgery, skin lightening, and hair straightening, removal or bleaching, in accordance with the representation of then dominant American, Anglo-Saxon, or Northern European ideals. In The History of White People, Nell Painter discusses, quote, a keen awareness of the difference between American standards of beauty and the bodies of women increasingly being called ethnic. Painter writes that in the 1930s and 1940s, ethnic became a label to describe groups of ethnicities that did not match the tall, slender, athletic look celebrated in the media. Desirable bodies also needed to appear middle rather than working class. Scholars such as Richard Dyer and Painter show how individual ethnicity was increasingly effaced in the US in the interwar, World War II, and post-war periods in favor of an Anglo-Saxon hegemonic American whiteness. Hegemonic American whiteness relied upon the othering of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. This othering often occurred through their absence and exclusion. It can also be seen more directly in a Pathé film accompanying Vogue's fashions of the future, shown in 5,000 theaters before estimated audiences of 12 million people. The behind-the-scenes footage opens by informing the viewer that the year is 2000, and immediately afterwards shows a Black woman dressing a white woman. The Black woman is outfitted in a maid's uniform, a stark contrast to the futuristic fashions of the white women she is dressing. Her attire signals that she is not permitted entry into the future. She must remain instead subservient in clothing that marks her as being from the 30s and recent American past, but not from the future. In this white supremacist vision, the future and the promises of better living it brings are only accessible to white people. This narrative is reliant upon the othering and continued subjugation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Far from a plastic utopia for all Americans, this plastic future replicated established, racialized, and gendered power structures. Similar imagery can be seen in 1939 feature film The Women. A group of wealthy white women attend an exclusive in-store fashion show at a New York City department store. During intermission, white women dressed in the latest fashions, including futuristic plastic hats, are handed refreshments by a black woman wearing an apron. The representation of these white women as modern, elite, desirable, and fashionable socialites again relied upon the stereotypical representation of what cultural theorist Stuart Hall describes as, quote, the spectacle of the other. Writing on the power of representation, Hall notes black actors were relegated to subservient roles in 1930s mainstream American cinema. The intermission scene is followed by the show's futuristic finale, featuring a lab-style set similar to DuPont's test tube girl and her Vogue contemporaries. A sequence of white women emerge from a revolving test tube and descend from the stage like the test tube girl. The show's final look comes complete with hood, like Miss Chemistry's, and embellished with plastic jewels. The show's white woman host comments, "You will be able to study the flow of the new line as it responds to the ever-changing flow of the female form divine," alluding to changes in dress and white women's bodies. People of color were largely excluded from the 1939 New York Fair. Only a handful of African Americans were employed in manual labor jobs, leading to protests. The fair's black attendance was low, partly due to economic factors. The cost of a day at the fair was inaccessible to many Great Depression-era individuals. Black representation at the fair was limited to entertainment, where musicians and performers were cast in stereotypically racist roles. Black bodies at the fair weren't streamlined, but were othered and problematically depicted as overtly sexual and unruly. In this racist dualism, black bodies were presented as undesirable and uncivilized, representing the past, while white bodies were modeled as desirable and embodying a civilized future. In DuPont's 1939 displays, white women's bodies were placed in the lab and represented similarly to materials to be transformed for the better. Only whiteness was represented, therefore implying that only these bodies could be improved. A 1939 Vogue article titled "Good Form" praised American women for their meticulous efforts towards streamlined figures and thanked controlling garments for their contribution. Quote, "It's not just an accident of nature and heredity that American women as a group have the most admirable figures in the world, giving their due to our long-legged frameworks, our athletic lives, and our conscientious efforts towards sleekness. Much credit still belongs to those little persuaders, corsets, that includes all controlling foundations, girdles, all-in-ones, brasiers." Unquote. New stretchy synthetics like nylon used in controlling foundations could increasingly help discipline the body into the fashionable streamlined silhouette. In 1944, Vogue enthused that foundation wear, which utilized the latest synthetic developments, provided a useful cosmetic aid with which to combat, quote, "the pattern of heredity," unquote, and shape your body as you wanted. The pliable materiality and moldability of plastics became associated with modeling the fashioned body into a racialized ideal. In the 1910s, a new color was introduced to underwear and became a leading alternative to white in ensuing decades. The hue, called flash, was a peach or pink tone, clearly restricting the audience for which it was created. Historian Jill Fields notes that bras in this color were worn underneath transparent blouses for a nude effect. This limited vision of flash color persisted and in many cases remains today. By the 1930s, the term nude was often used similarly to describe a pinkish beige color, particularly in underwear and hosiery, with the aim of creating the desirable illusion of wearing nothing underneath. Color sample books in this period demonstrate efforts to define this recently developed term. Elizabeth Burris Meyer, colorist and dean of the New York School of Fashion Careers, included nude in her 1935 list of color names in common use in merchandising and advertising, with the description natural skin color of a yellow-red hue. Burris Meyer's definition excluded darker skin tones and by omission rendered them unnatural. Similarly, the Textile Color Card Association of the United States labeled a light beige fabric color swatch as nude in their 1941 standard color card. These examples of color standardization informed industry as evidence in foundation wear and hosiery. Since 1940, Sears catalogues listed foundation wear, such as corsets and bras, as available in one shade only, nude. These examples show us how nude was presented exclusively as a light pinky beige colour, not as a colour palette of different shades that truly reflected racial diversity. Such exclusion reveals the systematic racism in which these colours were created and still applies to nude colours in many contexts today. A light beige colour, like the standard 1930s trade definitions of nude, can be seen in a pair of DuPont nylon wear test underwear. This colour was consistent with dominant lingerie trends. The waistband is labelled Wear Test 1938. DuPont tested their nylons by asking employees to wear them and using wear test machines. Similarly, the Hagley Museum and Science History Institute's collections of early wear test stockings are variations of a light peachy or beige colour. These objects show how DuPont's experimentations with nylon centered whiteness and arguably connected a singular configuration of womanhood with normalcy. Wear test underwear and stockings were also made in limited sizes, catering to an assumed slender white woman, again revealing wider ideological assumptions around body sizing and racialized gender ideals. In keeping with streamlined design's dominant ideology of standardization for mass production, these garments are shaped by interconnected discourses of whiteness, sexuality, and gender. These foundations cater to and are shaped by ideals presented as the standardized norm, that of the slim yet softly curved average young adult cis white woman. The efforts to standardize the racialized and gendered body, these efforts to standardize the racialized and gendered body are similarly evident in the creation of the Norma and Norman sculptures known as the average American boy and girl. These two statues were crafted in 1942 by sculptor Abram Belsky and eminent sex researcher Robert Latow Dickinson. Advocates of eugenics and sterilization legislation, this ideology clearly influenced their statues' creation. The statues were each modeled from the measurements of tens of thousands of white Americans. Historian Julian Carter notes that popular newspaper coverage of Norma and Norman made no comment about race at all. Similarly, the resounding absence of race and skin tones from definitions of nude, as well as nude hosiery and foundation wear copy, is striking. This absence of discussions of race is also evident in other 1939 imagery I've discussed. Whiteness is consistently presented as the unmarked norm, thereby violently erasing people of colour and reinforcing whiteness as the invisible norm. Norma and Norman were presented as norms of whiteness. Norma was shaped by a Bureau of Home Economics study of 15,000 white women conducted for ready-made garment standardized sizing. Again, we're reminded of the impact standardized sizing has in the creation of racialized gendered body ideals. The average Norma was incredibly rare, a calculated, elitist, racialized ideal, not a reality. This was quickly proven during a newspaper contest called The Search for the Living Norma. No one matched Norma's measurements. Martha Skidmore, the local white Norma next door, won the competition as her measurements came closest. The paper concluded, Norma remained hypothetical. Here, Norma was understood as an ideal, not a reality. Still, the impact of such efforts to define whiteness as unmarked normality are evident in figures like the test tube girl and related material culture from this period, such as nylons and foundation wear. Some post-war nylon ads in black publications explicitly emphasize a range of skin tones available. The Crisis, the NAACP's magazine, ran an ad for DuPont Beauty Fit nylons that stated they come in all skin tones. This Basin Street Nylons ad speaks directly to the reader, exclaiming, now designed especially for you. It features a headshot of a smiling black woman introduced as color stylist Jean Williams. It states that Williams created 3 colors that are definitely right, alluding to the fact that other nylon colors did not explicitly cater to people of color. The company, apparently named after Basin Street in New Orleans, continued to celebrate cities famous for African American arts and music in their color naming. Harlem for light complexion, Memphis for medium complexion, St. Louis for dark complexion. It's important to contextualize the choice of colors offered in these adverts within the color industry. In The Color Revolution, Regina Blaszek provides a history of the people and organizations, what she calls the color intermediaries, behind the phenomenal shift in the color profession between the mid-1800s and mid-1900s. At this time, Germany and the US invested in the synthetic organic chemical industry, revolutionizing the color industry. Blaszek observes new artificial dyes and pigments enabled other manufacturers to reproduce virtually any color, creating possibilities for great visual variety. Beyond Blaszek's analysis, it's worth emphasizing that while the science and technology to produce a wide range of pigments was achieved, it largely didn't result in industry developing hues for people of color. The Hagley and Science History Institute's surviving wear test items show that when it comes to creating nude-colored intimates, variety was not a priority for chemists or advertising staff at DuPont. The development of these products replicated dominant beauty ideals and established design practices that centered on whiteness as the norm. The majority of color descriptions for nylons assumed a white wearer. Basin Street Nylons is an outlier. In addition to offering colors that explicitly catered to Black consumers, it did not follow industry color standards that drew on names of foods like pecan, toast brown, spice brown, referencing colonialism and exoticization. Although the majority of other post-war hosiery companies offered a range of colors, unlike Basin Street Nylons, they did not explicitly address a range of skin tones. Instead, color descriptors such as this Harrison Hosiery Guide to 6 beige and brown tones assumed a white wearer and listed the season's fashionable shades of clothing they should be worn with. The practice of standardized color coordination was in keeping with norms developed after World War I by the Textile Color Card Association of America. Color stylist Boris Meyer noted that before the war, black, brown, and white were about the only hosiery colors. However, after the war, shorter skirts resulted in the emergence of pink flesh-colored stockings. A greater variety of shades were gradually added until the stocking market was saturated and industry turned to renaming old colors to maintain sales. The Textile Color Card Association, in cooperation with the National Association of Hosiery Manufacturers, coordinated hosiery colors with the seasonal colors in dress and eliminating the duplication of color names, resulting in a standard hosiery color card that contained the most sold staple shades. These standardized color guides were only concerned with matching hosiery colors to women's wear trends, not with the skin tones of the wearer, and implicitly assumed a white consumer. The standardized practice of developing hosiery colours to match the seasonal fashions for an unmarked racialized gender norm continued after World War II. Throughout the 1950s, Sears catalogues listed a range of 3 to 5 colours from, quote, light to darker, starting with shades like royal sand or amber tone, and ending with colours like royal mist, a greyish taupe or royal shadow, a dark grey, translucent black. This is not to say that they weren't worn by people of colour, but that the shades do not acknowledge or even mention difference in skin tones. Instead, companies such as Sears offered a range of shades as fashion right to complement every colour in your wardrobe. This shows that a range of dye shades was technologically available to hosiery brands and manufacturers. However, they chose to develop and promote their colours as corresponding to an assumed white wearer's varied and colourful wardrobe rather than a range of skin tones. In turn, some Black women dyed hosiery at home to better match their skin tone. Everyday post-war American imagery, such as Sears catalogues, represented a limited ideal of standardized womanhood that centered on whiteness and maintained the 1930s preference for normative, streamlined bodies. Notably, this ideology was reinforced by a repeating image in Sears' nylon section and sizing guide. Although supposedly created to illustrate different sizing needs, this visual bizarrely presented essentially the same slender, young, white, and often blonde woman in the same dress, simply scaled up in height to have consecutively longer legs. She appears in formation, dress aflutter, and stockinged legs on show, as if in a chorus line. These images are consistent with dominant advertising imagery in white stream publications and catalogues, representing a slender white woman as the ideal. Sears paired such uniform images with text praising proportions and endless customization. Each is wearing size 8.5, but in the length and width perfect for her. However, this promise of customization and advertising copy was limited and relied on whiteness as the unmarked norm. Sears stockings came in standardized sizes ranging from 8.5 to 11.5 with leg pattern options spanning petite, classic to tall with shapely options. This range of sizes catered to shoe sizes 3.5 to 10 and over and explicitly included wearers 4'8" to 6'2". By 1961, Sears expanded their range of sizes, claiming to cater to consumers up to 6'3". However, as evidenced in their imagery, Sears, in keeping with white stream media ideals, continued to illustrate difference by paradoxically depicting a homogeneous slender white leg. A decade later, in 1971, advertisements for Big Mama pantyhose appeared in numerous US publications. Their advertising and packaging featured 3 white-appearing plus-size women and listed sizes for a wider range of consumers. Sugar and Spice is another example of a company that reimagined the limited visions of nude nylons. This Chicago-based company advertised nylons in ebony in the 1970s. Unlike Basin Street, their advertisements did not feature the face of a designer or stylist. Instead, they showcased a group of Black models and celebrated the message of Black as beautiful. Nylons were an integral part of dress and identity for many queer, trans, and gender non-conforming people. However, this has not been considered in histories of nylon. This Tana and Mara advertisement is a rare example of a nylon ad aimed at queer and trans consumers. Tana and Mara is a New York-based mail-order fetish wear company established in the 1960s by striptease artists and stars of the underground fetish publishing scene, Tana Louise and Mara Gay. The ad is one in a series published between 1963 and 1965 in 6 early issues of trans publication Female Mimics. It caters to wearers who did not fit standardized length stockings, offering super length nylons in grey or black with seams in sizes 9 to 11. Publications in the Digital Transgender Archive provide valuable documentation of readers' varied lived experiences with nylons, such as the safest way to purchase them and sizing issues. Letters from Female Impersonators is one of these publications. The majority of photographs published in this magazine feature white-appearing and light-skinned contributors. In 1963, Betty Bill shared her experience of purchasing clothing. Like most of the girls who write you, I buy most of my clothing from mail order catalogs. And I think this is the safest way, since you can pick up the items at the catalog sales desk and the clerks think that you are merely picking up something that has been ordered by your mother or sister. She noted that the nylons she purchased were size 11 super long and a light shade. Throughout the 60s, stocking sizing remained an issue for many trans, queer, and gender non-conforming people, as documented in letters from female impersonators. Chris Ames, a star of the famous 82 Club, stressed the importance of sharing experiences and meeting other girls in person. Ames complained about regular length nylons running and snagging on stage from the strain and tautness of being worn with a garter belt for longer periods, as they weren't designed for her long legs. Sully Montiel shopped in specialist stores such as Tall Girls shops, enthusing, "I'm able to get sizes that fit me fairly well without having to have them custom made." Meanwhile, Bobby Weaver shared, "My nylons are bought in a special store by my sister because I wear a size 12 extra long." Erica remarked, "I feel I really stand out in a crowd when I request size 12 super long plain knit, or as some stores say, evening dress sheers, nylon stockings instead of just buying pantyhose." Tana and Mara filled a gap in the market for consumers who did not fit the limited standardized sizes, preferred stockings over hose, and did not feel safe or comfortable purchasing from a store in person. Tana and Mara's ad lists stockings in grey and black. The pages of letters from female impersonators attest to the popularity of darker shades of nylons and readers' experiences of wearing them. Dorothy observed, "My legs look much slimmer in dark nylons than in any other shade." Similarly, Betty Bill preferred a darker tint for her stockings and customized her pair with Tintex, dyeing 2 pairs deep brown, a design process also practiced by African-American fashion designer Zelda Wen Valdez, who dyed tights to match the skin tones of the dancers she worked with. Nylon's appeal was an enduring one. By 1971, the mainstream fashion for nylon stockings was in decline, and consumers like Erica noted that mail order was a preferable way for her to shop. She complained of the new trend for seamless mesh knit hose. "To me, this is just so much gauze around my legs," and invited readers to share their experiences of wearing them. Unlike the test tube girl and the limited heteronormative gendered white ideology of the future that she represented, nylon's uses and meanings were also shaped and reimagined by the individuals who wore them. DuPont's representation of nylon and the test tube girl was entangled in discourses on the creation of norms, standards, and ideals of a white, streamlined body. Powerful white men, including industrial designers and advertising executives, imagined an imminent future where one could scientifically control and aesthetically design the perfect white female body inside and out. It's the very absence of race within much of the discourse around imagery such as Miss Chemistry, Vogue's future breed of women, nylon wear test items, and standardized nude color descriptions that serves to reinforce white womanhood as the unmarked norm. Bodies that didn't fit this narrow, slender, heteronormative white ideal of gender were marked as non-normative. However, just like Norma demonstrates, the creation of such standards and the ideals they embody do not reflect reality. Yet the concept of norms and their modelling of ideals still significantly impacts our lived experiences as well as perceptions of ourselves. The legacy of the creation of nude colours that standardise whiteness as the norm can still be seen today in underwear branding and everyday items like bandages. However, this hasn't gone unchallenged, and there are increased efforts to address this, particularly among Black-owned businesses like GC2B, Brandages, and More Than Peach. It's important to historicise the emergence of standard practices such as singular definitions of nude and limited sizing practices, and their efforts to normalise racialised gender. It's only by deconstructing these practices and looking at less documented alternatives that we can uncover and address embedded power structures within standardisation. Nylons by companies like Basin Street Nylons and Tana and Mara, as well as people's lived experiences using nylons, provide an important and previously untold counter-history of nylons. These polyvocal narratives show how individuals and communities resisted the creation of racialized norms of gender and sexuality, in turn creating their own nylon futures.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. What a fascinating talk. It's really, really interesting to hear histories of things like nylons that pay attention to how limited the futuristic imagination could be, and what kind of a narrow band of people could be included in something supposedly as universal as the concept of a nude color.
Thank you. Thanks, Charlotte. I'd like to say thank you as well to Alexis, who's behind the scenes, and Molly and Katie and Ashley, who helped me curate the show as well.
Right, so we do have some time for questions. If you have a question for Isabelle, you can post it in the chat here on YouTube, or you can email it to us at education@sciencehistory.org. I guess I'll start out by asking you, Isabelle, if you could say just a little bit more about the place of this project on nylon in your larger book project that we were talking about.
Great. Thanks for the question. So my book project that you introduced briefly before, Atomic Bombshells, How Plastics Shape Post-War Bodies, is about different types of synthetic materials. So there's 3 materials that I look at. I look at nylon and plastic foams and silicons, and I trace the emergence and histories of these materials, their kind of links to chemical companies, and how particularly after World War II, they kind of are used in different ways. And so I really look at the kind of power structures embedded in these materials and the ways in which people have used those to sort of uphold and also challenge racialized gender norms and ideals. So the book actually begins with nylon and this particular image of the test tube girl or test tube lady. She has so many names. Princess Plastics is another one. And yeah, I guess I was really drawn to the fact that she's presented as stepping out from this test tube, and there hasn't been much exploration of how that fits into other themes around race and gender.
Fantastic. All right, we have a question from the audience. A question from Harvey. Part of the mythology of nylon is that the name came from the observation that a strand of nylon pulled from a lab beaker could stretch from New York to London. Do the archives support that mythology?
I love that mythology. I haven't heard of that one, I don't think. I think I would have remembered that as well, because I am from London, and spending time at the Hagley, which is quite remote. I would have been really happy to have seen a reference back to London, but maybe it's there and I just didn't see it. There are some other fantastic names and stories that are actually evidence in things like newspaper articles and the stories that DuPont tells as a company. So other options were, so legend has it that nylon was supposed to be called no run, because it was hoped that this would be this amazing material that wouldn't run and be the ultimate sort of stocking material. And unfortunately, it was very quickly found that nylon does run, so they couldn't go with no run. And then other options, my personal favorite probably is DuParoo, which is short for DuPont pulls a rabbit out of her hat. Because it was just like such a seen as like such a magic trick to be able to create this new artificial silk that remedied some of the issues that earlier artificial silks had. Yeah. So
fascinating. So how different are the nylons that we buy today from the original nylons that they were advertising, that the test tube girl was wearing herself?
That's a really good question. So I would say that one of the major changes in the nylons available today is also that, and I was talking about this a bit towards the end of the talk, is the fact that, usually we tend to buy just nylon pantyhose. And at this time, when nylon first came out, all that was available was nylon stockings. And yeah, so I'd say that is a major change.
Just one more question. I'm curious about your experience finding the sources that you've used. You've shown us some advertisements that are far afield from what I think a lot of us have been shown over and over again when we see documentary footage of the history of something like this that goes back especially to a World's Fair or something like this. And the sources you've used have been seemingly pretty off the beaten track from the kind of things that we normally see. Has it been difficult to find these advertisements, these companies, these products through the late 20th century, or were they just kind of there? What's been your experience?
So I would say there are a couple of ways of going about answering this. So first of all, I've been very fortunate with some of this because there has been a huge push for materials to be digitized. So for instance, when I was doing the original research for this during my PhD, where many of these ideas sort of stem from, there weren't as many sources available online that had been digitized. But I think with COVID and everything, many more sources have become digitized. And actually, as the project evolves, this is also because I have access to more sources. So that's one aspect. And then secondly, I think I really want to find these sources, so I will go out of my way. I've purchased some publications online as well, through eBay and things like that, because some of these sources are not digitized, and I will. Some sources also aren't searchable, so it's just a question of going through magazines. Yeah, so I guess it's a combination of sources, and the Digital Transgender Archive is an incredible resource that I'm really grateful for. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, I'm really looking forward to your book coming out. I think we all are. And in the meantime, I just want to say thank you so much again for this fantastic lecture. And thank you for telling us all about this work tonight.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone tuning in. And if you're local, I hope you're able to come and see the exhibition in person. So thank you.
All right. Thank you all for joining us this evening. For more from the Science History Institute, including updates on all of our virtual programs and events, you can follow us online. We are at scihistory.org on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And thank you all for joining us. Have a great evening.